over the weekend, there were still discussions of that big scandal out of Minnesota where there was a $1 billion scandal of fraud where money that was supposed to go, of course, to help people in need, to help people who had food shortages or issues with hunger and were on the streets. And this is during COVID, massive COVID fraud that was uncovered. Of course, the blame game started to come out, and now we have Representative Omar, someone who I don't usually say I agree with on a whole lot, but saying, you know what we should be blaming? We should be blaming the FBI. And of course, when you really start looking at it, what FBI are we talking about? We're talking about a 2021 FBI. We're talking about an FBI that was being run out of the Biden administration. And you know what? For the first time in a long time, I could say I may, at least partially, even if it's a deflection, agree with Representative Omar. Can you believe I said that? That, of course, this was under a time where the FBI had their eye off the ball, were going after the wrong people, and now you have these billion-dollar scandals that are really making big, big headlines. Of course, there's a huge conversation about whether that was going from the large Somali population there, which it is a large population. Let's, no ifs, ands, buts about it. It's got to be the largest in America, if probably one of the largest outside of Somalia. I would assume a lot of it happens to be in Minnesota. If you go and you walk around, it's not unlike going to London now. And I'm not saying it's dangerous. I'm not saying that there's any issues with that. I'm just saying if you're there, it's very clear. It's very open and honest. And that's why the representation is even Representative Omar. You have people who are representing the area saying, okay, but some of this money looked like it could have been going to terrorism through al-Shabaab. And now that investigation begins. Where do we point the blame? Do you point the blame at the Somali people? Do you point the blame at the people who have immigrated to the state, mostly legally, to the state of Minnesota? I think they said the vast majority of the people that are there are United States citizens, legally immigrated to America. Or do we point the blame where, likely it should go, where she's pointing as well, which is to a failure in the FBI, once again finding out that their eye was off the ball.
Whenever someone throws out it's a failure of the FBI, you always think in current terms, not necessarily when the crime happened, and this would have happened under the previous administration. Clearly, she didn't say we need to blame Joe Biden's FBI and Department of Justice on this, but we will get into it, and we want to hear from you as well. Do you agree to some degree with Congresswoman Omar that this is a failure of the FBI? But we'll also get into some of the reasons why this scandal isn't going away for politicians from Minnesota and why it also could be expanding elsewhere.
Who was involved that got this money that should have been going, tax dollars, to public assistance programs? Somehow looks like it could have made its way to the Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Shabaab based in Somalia. And Representative Omar was doing the rounds on a lot of the Sunday morning shows talking about this. Let's play a clip from it so you have a good idea of what the conversation was, the tone was.
Republicans and the Treasury Secretary just now talked about a link to terrorism, a possible link. He said they're just now beginning to look into it. How confident are you that that's a false claim?
I'm pretty confident at the moment because there are people who have been prosecuted and who have been sentenced. If there was a linkage in that the money that they had stolen going to terrorism, then that is a failure of the FBI and our court system in not figuring that out and basically charging them with these charges.
So we got to kind of piece that off. So say, okay, she blames the FBI here, but really what she's doing is blaming the court system, saying, hey, if there was alleged terrorism, they missed it because some of these people have already been sentenced. Now, if it wasn't uncovered and it wasn't discussed by that FBI, she's right. That in 2021, when all of this was happening during COVID, that this would have been something they could have prosecuted, gone after. But you have a new FBI in charge, one that's actually looking at a lot of these facts and finding out that, you probably can blame a lot of this on an FBI who wasn't paying attention. But of course, as you could tell in her voice, this is a deflection from what's going on there.
It wasn't just the one program, the Feeding Our Future and other COVID money programs. There was also Medicaid fraud extensively throughout Minneapolis and throughout the state of Minnesota, that the whole fraud on the people of Minnesota and on the U.S. taxpayer as well, because a lot of these are federally funded programs, was over $1 billion. So they are still having to go out there and do these interviews to try and spin it. Because who was the author of the bill in U.S. Congress, the Meals Act of 2020, which funded in states this $250 million of the fraud
who wasn't
that
paying
happened.
attention?
It was Ilhan Omar. She wrote the bill and introduced it into Congress. It passed bipartisan because it was a COVID relief bill trying to get food to needy families. But $250 million of the billion-dollar fraud went through that program, the meals program, from her legislation. So, of course, she's going to try and take the blame and not say, oh, I didn't have safeguards in the way that this money would be distributed in my legislation. I have to blame somebody else. Who am I going to blame? The FBI. But not say which FBI, just the FBI and
FBI.
Courts generically, as if the courts themselves are the one that bring the charges. But in reality, it's also a little bit more layered, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the investigation is if an individual in Minnesota was writing a check to Al-Shabaab and handing it over. It's investigating the systems that we have in place that can protect against sending money to a place like Somalia, because these people have family there. A lot of them still have families that are there. If you remit money to Somalia, their entire economy is captured by Al-Shabaab. So therefore, they are skimming money off the top. It may not have been intentional funding of terror, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't happening. As far as will anyone go to jail for this? One, we know that 87 people have been charged in Minnesota for fraud.
So
that's a lot of people.
And some people, according to have gone to jail for this. There have been people who've been sentenced already.
Right.
But now we are seeing that the fraud was beyond just, like I said, get-rich-quick schemes or things like that. We are seeing now that the funding was going to, again, now potentially funding terrorism through Al-Shabaab. That changes a lot of this.
And I haven't seen any direct allegations other than uncomfortably close to these politicians, people that owned a restaurant that Ilhan Omar had a victory party at, happened to be one of the fraudsters, things like that. So by relation to the community.
And being in a room alone with politicians is uncomfortably close.
I mean, and just some would say maybe you're close to criminals. It depends on the politician and the way you go. There haven't been allegations of direct wrongdoing by these politicians other than the fact that they had the mechanisms in their state that made it so easy for fraud to happen. There should at least be political consequences. These people, we are grateful that the vice president of the United States is not Tim Walz, because we see how great his administration did at stopping waste, fraud, and abuse in his state. Imagine that on a national scale.
I'm not saying that everyone that lives there and is a Somali immigrant was part of this scheme to get money to Al-Shabaab or to whoever. Of course, that wasn't necessarily the case. But again, it's a deflection. And do I like when people go on and start yelling specifically about the Somali community? No, I think that that's a low blow and unnecessary right now. I think we need to look at what was really going on, where the fraud is coming from, where the money is coming from, where it's going, and how it was not taken care of, and how we were not taking care of this. And like I said, from the FBI, I think that's probably true. But now you have a new FBI in charge. That changes a lot of this.